Glad you lost the tie. That was a good move.
Yeah, the worst part was putting it on. Taking it off was great, so
Okay.
not a problem.
You're sort of the opposite of a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
So tell me, what's your role at Shell?
So I'm the general manager of regulatory policy and advocacy for Upstream Americas. And what does that mean? Sometimes I ask myself that question, but basically, let me back up just a second. I have transitioned into this one. Prior to this, I was VP of Social Performance and Sustainable Development. So now I've moved into this one. But our group basically monitors regulations that are being developed by various governments, whether North or South America. We look at them and look at what the impact would potentially be to the businesses, try and figure out the cost to the business, understand whether or not we can actually comply with what it is they're putting in place, because sometimes you do see regulations that you can't comply with. Work with the business to put together what our position should be, and then work with governments and other outside parties to, for lack of a better term, advocate for what we think our position is. Yeah. And in most cases, it's a very collaborative process with other industry groups, sometimes NGOs, local government, federal government, all depends.
So one of the interesting things I think about Shell and some of the conversations that you, Mike, are having is you're talking a lot about natural capital and understanding that that doesn't have a really highly defined meaning yet. We're all still talking about it in different ways, even though we may think we sort of all agree. What are the definitions that Shell is using of natural capital? How does it fit into how you think about your business these days?
So, yes, natural capital, that's the new, for lack of a better term, buzzword that's out there on how we're dealing with things. It's transitioned and morphed over years from a lot of different things. I'll date myself and say that we were working on projects that were natural capital, green infrastructure type projects back in the 80s, although we didn't call it that. How does Shell define it? Basically, Shell looks at natural capital. We define it more as the environmental attributes that we need to deal with as we're moving forward in designing a program. And basically it's nature, right? And what are those environmental attributes that are there? What makes the site unique? How is the civil society that's living there taking advantage of those? What is it food source? Is it water usage? Is it food, fiber? Really, what is it? What's there and why is it there? And really trying to understand that at the front end before we go in and start design a project, so we can design it in concert with really trying to fit the needs of those particular communities. And then also never forget that there's a whole regulatory or governmental planning structure that's out there you need to comply with. So it's really trying to fit all those complex pieces of the puzzle together. So I wouldn't say we call it natural capital per se. That's something, that definition will evolve and morph into whatever it is. But it's really understanding where you're going and how you're going to deal with it.
So it sounds like you're not talking about natural capital per se, because you said it's a buzzword, which means it's not really operational. You said you've been talking about this since the 80s. I'm not sure. Is this not a term of art within a term of practice within Shell, or
no? So let me try.
I'm trying to understand. Like buzzwords are often old wine in new bottles, and
right.
Is there something you're doing differently now because of an understanding of natural systems and how they relate to your value chain?
Yeah. So, we've been looking at natural capital for over 10 years. We have looked at it from a perspective of biodiversity action plans that we require. We've looked at it from sensitive areas analysis, from our commitment to stay out of protected areas and move forward. So natural capital is always there. The question, I think, when I say natural capital is a buzzword is there going to be a standardized way to monetize that, right? To put a number around that. That's what's evolving. We have always looked at that and internally said, okay, what is the cost that we are going to incur by working in this environment? So that could be, is it the cost to buy water? Is it the cost to mitigate something? Is it the cost to move forward? How does that all fit into our economics for our particular project?
So you're putting costs on things that used to be intangible or less tangible in order to make business decisions? Is that
Correct.
Can you give us an example of how that played out or is playing out in a particular project or facility?
Yeah, we can talk about a project that we've got that we're working with right now in the Nature Conservancy, and it's around coastal erosion in Louisiana, in the wetlands, and our pipelines. We have a lot of pipelines, as does a lot of different sectors of the industry running through that part of Louisiana. And the cost to maintain those is very, very high. Every time there's a major storm, you have to go in, you have to, a lot of times, do a lot of maintenance work and move things forward. So
To the wetlands or to the pipelines?
well, protection for the pipeline in the wetlands.
Okay.
And what traditionally we've used, brick and mortar type approaches to dealing with it, which is high upfront cost, maintenance costs, things of that nature. So what we're exploring right now is what if we use a natural system for that? So what if we create artificial oyster reefs and other types of things to provide that protection and resiliency that you need for those pipelines, limiting our maintenance costs long term, and really trying to reestablish a natural system that's there. And we're working in concert with our partner, TNC, on that.
So what would the
we're
oyster
moving forward.
reef, what would you have previously done instead of the oyster reef?
We would have went in and basically put in a concrete bulkhead along the pipeline that costs money, doesn't provide habitat. You have to go in and maintain it and remove it.
So in areas like that where you've got lots of oil and gas companies with pipes running through the same areas, does Shell work with Exxon and BP and Chevron and whoever else in saying we're all using this same, few square miles or hectares of land, that we should be working together to try and build up the resilience, or is that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to work with, some pipelines are not totally ours, and there are other people, but no, you have to work with other competitors in the industry. And at the end of the day, the reality of it is, to get the biggest bang for your buck, in my mind, you need that collaboration. You need that synergy to bring everybody together and work forward. I mean, if you're working on a natural system for, let's just say, for example, 100 meters of pipeline here, but you're not doing anything there, what's really the value add? So we're trying to work that. Are we 100% successful? I think we will get better, but absolutely it's there.
So what are you learning about how easy or hard, how cost effective, both in terms of labor intensity, but also in terms of the sort of cost benefit of using sort of natural or building up the natural capital, investing in the green infrastructure, as opposed to laying down concrete bunkers or concrete traditional infrastructure?
Well, what we're learning, and in my mind, I mean, there's a real business driver for this, right? This isn't just something that you're looking at and you're doing it to feel good or philanthropy. There's a true business driver.
What is the business driver?
Business driver, if you're looking at things like that, the business driver around that is, if you can make it work, is low upfront capital costs, reduce long-term maintenance and OpEx, reduce human resource, reduce energy costs, and quite frankly, being able to frame up your long-term, in my mind, your long-term liability when the asset is done and you're ready to move out. So you can capture all those at the front end. So it just makes good sense to do that. At the same point in time, there's intangibles that come with that are, in my mind, our values. We've tried for a long time, I say we, and Shell, but people have tried for a long time to monetize some of these. And there's societal values that come with that are more of the intangibles that are out there. But it's working in concert with the fishermen and the local communities to get them to understand what's going on. How do we coexist in that particular habitat? Because, industrial fishing, commercial fishing, is just as big in the Gulf as oil and gas. Right. So we've got to find those synergies. And when you start working green infrastructure projects like that, it really opens a lot more doors for you also.
I would imagine also it gets you in a happier cycle than if you keep building concrete infrastructure, then you further deplete the resources and the ecosystems, which requires more infrastructure. And so by reversing that with the oyster beds, for example, you basically help nature do what she does best.
Well, you're reducing, well, the cement manufacturers may not be happy, but other than that, what you're looking at is you're reducing your, impacting your supply chain, because you don't need the raw materials that you're looking at before. You're right. You don't need the steel. You don't need the cement. You don't need the energy it takes to put these things in. So
how hard is it to get a company to think differently about this in terms of CapEx and OpEx and getting the CFO engaged and just this whole mindset of not automatically picking up the phone and calling the concrete folks?
It's not easy. These things take a lot of time. I mean, we've been working on this particular project for a number of years, and it's trying to get, you're exactly right, it's trying to get not just the CFO, but the asset managers and the engineers to think differently. I mean, because it's easy, you've got a ready-made solution, right? You turn to page 32, and away you go. And can we stand up and say, yeah, we know for a fact that this oyster reef will have the same design life as this concrete bulkhead? No, we don't. So it's not easy, but the key to it is you have to put it in their terms. So it's like, everybody's got their own vernacular, their own acronyms, their own languages. So you've got to be able to put these things in business terms and sit down with them and go through the whole process of explaining, okay, these are the advantages. This is why your project can go forward. This is where you're going to save costs. This is where you're going to save liability. Do we know for a fact it's going to be 100% certain? No. There's some risk, but we take risk all the time.
Yeah, of course.
So what do we got to lose?
And not only is it not just turning to page 32, but in some cases, that page doesn't exist yet. You've got to be writing that page. Is that something you're starting to develop? Is a sort of a handbook of sorts, at least?
For designing around natural systems? Yeah, that's something that's a cookbook that's in the works. There's no doubt about that. And I really think engineers, they want solutions, and they want the easiest solution, the least costly solution. So there is a group. We have groups within Shell that focus on various things when it comes to natural capital and green infrastructure. We're trying to drive and get a mindset with some of our engineers to look into this. Then we also have groups that deal with water and soils and sensitive areas and biodiversity and the whole 9 yards. Yeah. But I think as this evolves and matures and the demand is there, then that should eventually trickle down then to the academics. And so then all of a sudden, maybe as engineers are graduating, this is part of a curriculum too. Great. A long-term goal.
Yeah. Elaine, what questions do we have?
Yeah, we have some tricky ones here. One is, how is Shell responding to investors concerned that oil sands exploration is a bad use of CapEx that should be returned to them as dividends?
Wow, okay, that's...
So I didn't hear the whole thing, my apology. So can you just give me a synopsis?
Yeah, let me switch topics here in terms of just kind of along the same lines, which is more, what natural capital assessment did Shell make before deciding to extract oil in the Arctic or do any of that kind of exploration?
Is natural capital factoring in when you look at Arctic?
Oh, yeah.
Other?
So let's understand that the way when we go in and start a new project, we do a very thorough impact assessment. So we really understand what's there from both the environmental and social aspect of things. So we don't go into these things blindly. We understand what's there, and we're looking at that impact assessment that we do.
But you've always done that. That's just SOP for oil and gas exploration. Is there something new that's happening?
Yes, our impact assessment is broader. I mean, one could say, well, in the United States, NEPA requires an environmental impact statement. Our impact statement goes beyond that. And so it's beyond what's required by strictly.
But do you actually start accounting for natural capital in those assessments?
Yeah, we do. Well, accounting, do we put dollars and cents on our books?
Cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, we do cost-benefit analysis. We look at a mitigation hierarchy of avoidance, first and foremost, mitigation secondly. And so all those come into play as we're making those decisions to figure out if we can have a viable business that's no harm to the environment, no harm to society, and moving forward.
And do you ever find that just the numbers don't add up and you say, let's move on?
Well, I think our I think our commitment to stay away from protected areas and natural areas says that out in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we fundamentally know there are certain areas out there, protected areas, that, quite frankly, oil and gas development can't coexist with where they're at. It just doesn't make sense. So,
Well, we'll look forward to watching that cookbook develop and seeing what ingredients you come up with and what comes out of it.
well, we'll keep after it and see what happens.
Great.
Okay.
Please join me in thanking Mike
Thank you.
Long. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks.